Hey guys, my name is Moon and welcome back for more Higurashi When They Cry, Chapter 4, Himatsubushi. So last time Akasaka was talking with the informant Sato, right? And there he explained or he told, I guess, like a story of what the meeting of the families was about, right? Pretty much confirmed that they were behind the kidnappings as well, right? Of Inukai's grandson. So yes, let's just continue today and let's see what happens. I wonder how long this chapter is gonna be. It doesn't feel like it's gonna be long, right? I had a restless night's sleep. I did nothing but turn over repeatedly during a night that seemed like it lasted for eternity. Even then, I eventually fell asleep at some point, not realizing how high in the sky the sun had risen. I shook off the urge to go back to sleep. It was then I noticed that the phone was ringing. The time was almost 10:30 in the morning. It was clearly too late for a wake-up call.
Akasaka さんですか。おはようございます。大石です。
Ooshi desu. And there we have his laugh. Waking up to the sound of Oishi's voice was a little too much of a shock. My delicate ears were ringing, but thanks to that shock, I was suddenly wide awake.
どうも。
Domo.
おはようございます。
ひょっとして今お目覚めですか。出張中とはいえ勤務時間には起きないといけませんよ。
まったくです。以後、気をつけます。
あなたの眠気をもう一つ覚ましてあげられるかもしれない話があります。ひなみ沢駐在所から届いた遺失物に興味深いものが混じっていたんです。
Oh, okay.
遺失物。
詳しい話はこちらにいらっしゃってからにしましょう。お昼前に来れますか。
いえ、すぐに伺います。
Oishi already knew what my mission was. Since Oishi said it was something that would wake me up, it was hard to believe that it would be relevant or irrelevant to me. Honestly speaking, judging by information from Sato-san yesterday, knowing that my cover was already blown, I couldn't wonder too, and from Hinamizawa carelessly. In other words, my investigation was at an impasse. If there was some information there that could put me back on the trail, that would be nothing less than a stroke of good fortune. After vigorously washing my face, I pulled on my jacket and hailed a taxi, heading towards the Okonomiya police station.
おお、来た来た。天才ジャンシ様の到着だ。
The genius mahjong player.
遅くなって申し訳ありません。で、一体何が出たんですか。
With absolutely no intention of reminiscing about last night's mahjong game, I pressed him to get to the point. Oishi, anticipating that I would act that way, cut to the chase without any resistance.
先ほども申し上げましたが、今朝ひなみ沢の駐在所から遺失物が届きました。
Lost items that were turned over to the police box were sent to Okonomiya station after the paperwork was filled out. Oishi pulled out a plastic bag from a drawer and laid its labeled contents on the desk.
財布ですか。
A wallet.
でしょうな。中には小銭はあってもお札はなかったもんなんで、スリが中身を抜いた後に捨ててったのかななんて思ったんですがね。最初は。
I didn't understand how this wallet, so far removed from Tokyo, could possibly be related to the kidnapping. If it had drawn Oishi's attention, it would be something dramatic, like if the wallet belonged to the missing grandchild. That would be absurd. I mean, maybe though. Like something that convenient would happen. If that was it, then there were probably initials written on the wallet. Like the initials of Toshiki Inukai, the minister's grandson, T.I. T.I. isn't there a rapper? Thinking like that, at this point, I didn't suppose that this wallet was something that could get Ooshi so excited. Ooshi, after putting on a pair of disposable plastic gloves, handed me a pair of the same. I didn't feel that this wallet was such an important thing, so I had my doubts about whether there was any point in putting on gloves. However, I didn't want Oishi's intentions to go to waste, so I put them on. Ooshi opened the plastic bag and pulled it out, showing me the back. As I had imagined, there were initials engraved there. But it was slightly more detailed than what I thought, with Toshiki I marked on it. Ooshi grinned at me with a look on his face that said, "See? We can't confirm from that this belongs to the minister's grandson," I informed him calmly. I mean, it does say Toshiki I already though. This wallet was irrelevant. It was nothing more than Oishi's overeagerness. First of all, there was absolutely no way in this distant locale that the missing grandson's wallet would be found with such convenient timing. After all, the Onigafuchi Guardians wasn't related to the case in the first place. So there was no way this wallet belonged to the grandson. Why I wanted to decide that was the case, even I didn't really know. Even though what should have been a top secret case was leaked before it had been dispatched. In this situation, how could I say this was definitely unrelated? Would it be more prudent to pay more attention to this wallet? It had only been a couple of days since I arrived in Hinamizawa, but in those couple of days, due to a number of remarkable events, my nerves might have become just a little frayed. Shaking my head slightly, I cleared it of unnecessary thoughts. Ooshi opened the wallet zipper, revealing the contents. Inside was a small change and a number of crumpled receipts. Ooshi from the jumble pulled out a folded card. Seeing that, my heart stopped for a moment. It was a card from a dental examination. The name Toshiki Inukai and the age, a perfect match. The dentist's location was in Tokyo. There was no need to explain any further. How far was it from Tokyo to Hinamizawa? It was far enough that taking the bullet trains and cars would still take several hours. Why would a wallet with a dental examination card from Tokyo inside show up in Hinamizawa? Could it belong to a tourist who came from Tokyo? Or maybe a villager on vacation to Tokyo who just happened to pay a visit to the dentist? No, it had to have fallen into somebody's bag by accident. In my mind, I desperately struggled to find a possible excuse as to why this wallet didn't belong to Toshiki Inukai. It was if it just wouldn't do for this wallet to belong to him. However, weeding out any possibility for error one by one, the haze surrounding the wallet in front of me faded gradually, letting it come into clear focus.
Ne?
I felt a shiver of electricity run up my spine. My pulse quickened and a thin line or a thin film of sweat began to coat my entire body. From Oishi's point of view, I was probably slack-jawed and spaced out with a slovenly look on my face.
この歯科には問い合わせましたか？
そりゃ赤坂さんの仕事でしょ。私はまだそこまでは。
この財布はいつ頃のものでしょうね。
拾ったのは村人です。
Was a villager where?
昨日のことだそうで。
じゃなくて、この財布はいつ頃落ちたものでしょうね。
ここいらに雨があったのはちょうど先週7日前。
7 days ago? I mean, that's quite long.
中身が水にやられた様子はないから、最長で6日前からでしょうね。
この財布の存在は署内で誰が知ってます？
初期対応のhinamizawa駐在所の警官、それから遺失物対応で係が 2,3 人、あとは私とあなた。内緒の事件と関係があったらまずいでしょ。ベラベラとは喋ってないつもりですよ。
電話を借りていいですか？
どうぞどうぞ。外線はゼロ発信から。
I dialed the phone number inscribed on the examination card. I could hear my pulse pounding inside my head. Could there possibly be something so absurd? The addresses on the receipts and the cards inside the wallet were all from around the area where the grandson lived. The name on the examination card was also a match. The time we deducted that the wallet had been left behind also matched up with the timeline of the kidnapping. Of course, it was possible I could just laugh it off as all a big pile of coincidences. There wasn't any strong evidence. Rather than all this circumstantial proof, the contents of the phone call I was about to make would have been a much greater meaning.
はい、お待たせしました。中川歯科です。
Nakagawa Dental Office.
どうも。こちらは沖宮署です。実は、お財布の落とし物がありまして、所有者の連絡先を探しております。ご協力をいただいてもよろしいでしょうか。お財布の中にそちら様の診察カードが入っておりまして。ええ。氏名は犬飼俊樹くんです。カードの番号を申し上げますので、電話番号をお調べいただいてもよろしいでしょうか。ええ。ありがとうございます。お願いできますか。
Still holding the receiver, I pulled out a notebook from my breast pocket with my free hand. I opened it up to the page with the grandson's address and phone number recorded into it.
どうもすみません。はい。お願いします。
Onegaishimasu. I compared the phone number written in my notebook to the one that was being read out on the other end of the line. During that process, I spun around to look behind me uneasily. I locked eyes with Ooshi-san. Ooshi looked puzzled, wondering what the matter was. Why would I feel uneasy and look behind me? That was because the person on the end of the line was reading out the numbers as though doing so straight from my notebook. So yeah, he's just confirming it, honestly. It seemed that HQ was in quite an uproar thanks to my report. No matter how many times the authenticity of the evidence I had linked to the grandson was called into question, I could only respond that it was the truth. When the lead investigator first picked up the phone, I was grilled about the evidence I'd found that was almost too good to be true, if I do say so myself. But after having doubt after doubt dispelled, he fell into silence. The receiver was finally handed over to the section chief. When he picked it up, the background drum on the other end of the line disappeared and I knew that it had gone completely silent. After asking the same questions about the wallet that the lead investigator did, the chief quietly spoke his next words.
わかりました。こちらから何人か増援を送ります。今日の夕方には到着できるでしょう。赤坂君は引き続き現地調査をお願いします。財布が発見された地域の情報を収集しててください。加納さんは何人か選んで現地へ直接。
The fact that he was sending Kano, the lead investigator here, meant that the chief had decided there was a possibility that the Onagafuchi guardians were somehow implicit in the kidnapping. However, it felt as though until the lead investigator whom he trusted had verified the evidence with his own eyes, he was still going to be skeptical about it. Honestly, I think the guardians did it already though, right? It was kind of implied, right?
本庁から増援が出発するそうです。私は現地調査を命じられました。財布の落ちていた場所はどこなんです？
高津戸のあたりだそうです。ここが沖宮。ずーっと行ってここがひなみ沢で、さらに上流にぐーっと上がっていくとこの辺が高津戸です。
Ooshi explained where the wallet was found by pointing to locations on the map on the wall. This place called Takatsudo was even more remote than Hinamizawa was.
高津戸界隈はほとんど民家なんかありませんよ。昔の廃村です。無人の家屋が点在する、なんとも寂しいあたりですね。
大石さん、高津戸へ案内してもらうことはできますか？
構いませんよ。赤坂さんお一人ではなかなか自由にひなみ沢に出入りはできないでしょうからね。無論また野球帽とマスクをしてもらうことになりますが。
That Ooshi had agreed to accompany me was very reassuring. If Sato-san's info was to be believed, my cover had been blown. I wasn't sure if the villagers had realized that the fresh meat dispatch from the public safety was the tourist that had visited the village yesterday. In other words, me. But deciding that they hadn't noticed would have been overly optimistic. Given a cursory thought, Takatsudo, where the wallet was found, couldn't be ruled out as a hiding spot for the kidnappers. The Takatsudo area didn't have any residential buildings, nor was it alongside a highway. There wasn't a reason for even the locals to go out of their way to visit it. Maybe there's just a hidden place there, right? That you couldn't just see? I mean, these are kidnappers. It was exactly what you call a long-forgotten ghost town at the end of the road. You couldn't ask for a better place to hold a kidnapped grandson. Also, you couldn't get to Takatsudo without passing through Hinamizawa first. Though several conditions made the area all the more important, I couldn't brush it off any longer. There was no longer any doubt that the Onagafuchi guardians or somebody hired by them were involved in the kidnapping. If that was the case, then the fact that his wallet was found might have already been leaked to them. They even knew so much as how the public safety division was operating. The case of the wallet couldn't be something they didn't know. In that case, there was a possibility that the enemy was lying in wait. To dive alone into enemy territory, surrounded by enemy territory to say the least, required an amount of courage, nay, recklessness that I just did not have.
大石さんの同行がなければ、そうおいそれと踏み込めない村でしたので、ご協力いただけて本当に助かりました。正直なところ、またお金を要求されるのではと思ってましたよ。
それは正直を言えば、ひなみ沢なんか好き好んできたがないですからね。運賃でも弾んでもらいたい気分ですが。
Wait, don't you have a car though?
でも一緒にタコを囲んだ友人の頼みとあれば断るわけにはいきませんしね。
Ooshi grinned as he pounded me on the back. It struck me that he just didn't want to jump ship rather than having any sort of sense of duty towards his job. Even so, that didn't really matter. Right now, I really appreciated the gesture.
では、早速出してもらえますか。
If the enemy knew that the police station had obtained the wallet, then they would probably have moved the hostage to a different place. There wasn't a moment to lose, but Ooshi, without regard to the fact that we were about to head out, began to remove his jacket.
何をしてるんですか。
まあ用心ですよ。家中の栗を拾うなら相応の用意が必要と思いましてね。あなたも来ます。
What Ooshi pulled from the drawer below the desk was a stab-proof vest. So he's just making sure, right? But yeah, if they stabbed you in the head, what then? Okay, here we go. Is it gonna be intense this episode? His name was Toshiki Inukai, the grandson of the Minister of Construction Inukai. There was only one reason for him being here. If he didn't include gym or art class, his grades were above average. That was the result of having private tutoring sessions twice a week. If you omitted the fact that he still couldn't do pull-ups, there wasn't much else that would make him hate school. Of course, he understood full well that his grandpa or grandpa was a cabinet minister. But he also knew that not too many people were that interested in their relationship. He didn't like to go out of his way to bring up his grandpa or to call him the minister of construction. I wonder what the feeling is if you have a relative, right? Your dad, your grandpa, your mom, like in a high position in the government. I wonder what that feeling is gonna be like. And finally, he at least tried to know a little more about what kind of work the minister of construction did than your average Joe. What that entailed was that when you tried your best to make life better for the masses, sometimes you made a few enemies. He knew that all too well from the time he'd spent as a class representative. His grandfather had many enemies. He knew that he might personally catch some of that fallout, so he had to be twice as cautious. Yes, he was taught by his parents. That's why the moment he was kidnapped, he instantly knew that this was one of those occasions. He understood that he wasn't being treated as Toshiki Inukai, the person, but rather as Toshiki Inukai, the grandson of the Minister of Construction. That he wasn't personally at fault, but that this was the result of some unavoidable trouble with his grandfather's work. It made a little difference, but when he realized it wasn't because of anything he did, he was able to relax if only a little. Of course, at first, he was struck with terror befitting his age, wondering what was going to happen to him. But after a while of being tied up and only able to stay lying down, he began to ponder a great many things. First, he thought about the reason he was being abducted like this. He understood the answer to that easily. He was taken hostage to coerce his grandfather, the minister. There was no doubt about that. He didn't know exactly what the Minister of Construction did, but it was easy to imagine that there was much to be gained from threatening him. He respected his grandfather more than most. He earnestly believed that his own grandfather was within the top 20 of the most important people in Japan. I mean, he's the Minister of Construction, of course he is. That was exactly why he wouldn't forgive anybody who tried to threaten his beloved grandfather. More importantly, he wouldn't forgive anybody who would use him as a tool to threaten his grandfather. His grandfather was really busy and rarely had time to meet with relatives. That's why, with what little time he did manage to scrape together, he just dropped by unannounced. And as an apology for not being able to meet during New Year's or summer's vacation, he doted on his grandson very, very much. The number of times that Toshiki was looked upon with disregard just because his grandpa was a politician and the minister certainly weren't few. But he never thought even once that he wanted his grandpa to quit being a politician. Because it was his beloved grandfather, he wanted him to continue his career as long as possible from the bottom of his heart. However, Toshiki was now being held hostage and his grandpa was being threatened. His grandpa, who called him the apple of his eye, was surely suffering. He might do anything to save his grandpa, or grandson, I mean. Maybe even putting aside his ideology if it was required to save his grandson. He might cave into the culprit's demands if it meant saving his grandson. When Toshiki thought about that, an inexplicable anger welled up within him. In his current situation, he wasn't able to forgive the cowards who would make his beloved grandpa suffer by using such dastardly means. That feeling swelled up inside of him, displacing the fear. What he thought at first was something any boy would imagine. Get out of this bond, beat up the bad guys, then hand them over to the cops. Images of all the brave heroes from all the manga he had read passed through the back of his mind. In his imaginary scenario, he slipped his bonds easily, floating like a butterfly to evade his captors, then singing like a bee to bring them all down. In the end, it was nothing more than a silly little fantasy, but with his vision obstructed and unable to see anything, it was something that he could get into more than any anime at the moment. In actuality, he was enjoying these little scenarios in his head for a long period of time when he was tied up. His captors hadn't really done anything to him that they would feel sorry for. However, eventually he began to grow tired of his fantasies and the more realistic scenarios began to run through his head. It was then he realized that none of them were a solution. Yes, he wanted to do something for his grandpa who was being threatened. Then he was being held here to inflict pain on his grandpa was the thing that he could at least forgive and also the most vexing. And then he noticed there was a much simpler way he could save his grandpa without having to beat up his despicable captors. Thus remove himself as a hostage from the hands of these villains. If he was to disappear from here, his captors would have gone or have nothing to threaten his grandfather with. The captors had restrained him, but they didn't treat him roughly and they made sure he was fed well enough. Meaning at most, he was nothing more than the means for their threat. They weren't looking to bully or kill him out of spite. If he behaved, no ill would befall him. Realizing that gave him a strong sense of courage. And carrying his train of thought this far, he let it run its course to its natural conclusion. Right now, at this moment, Toshiki Inukai had decided to escape. His ears had been stuffed with a sponge-like material acting as a makeshift earplugs. However, they didn't actually do much to block out any sound, and he could overhear everything his captors were saying. Can you even go far though if he could escape? Like, this is very far away, right? Realizing that this was his advantage, even when his captors spoke to him, he acted like he couldn't hear them due to the earplugs. His captors, thinking that he couldn't hear the conversation, talked about all sorts of things without any reservation. Thanks to that, he was able to obtain various pieces of information. First of all, this wasn't in Tokyo. It seemed that this was quite a distance away, and on top of that, in the countryside, nestled deep within the mountains. It also seemed that his captors were inconvinced living out here, so he could deduce that this place was far removed from any sort of town. Finally, whenever they went out to buy food or other supplies, they would always take a car. The fact caused him some dismay, because he knew that the method he learned at school of running around blindly while shouting for help wouldn't work here. He paused his little mental escape scenario there. His ultimate goal was to find somebody who would help him. If somebody who fit that description wasn't close by, his chances of escaping successfully grew slim. A desolate, far-off land deep within the mountains. A place where you couldn't even go shopping without a car. In this situation, escaping would be very difficult. He grew depressed, and after a little while, he returned to his original scenario. Imagining becoming a hero like in the manga he had read, and beating down his captors became his respite. However, as he played those illusions on his head or out his head, his heart, hating to surrender, continued to search for a way to escape. And then he thought of a way. If the goal was far away, then all he had to do was get closer. His goal in a nutshell was to find somebody who would help him. In other words, somebody other than his captors. If he faked being sick, then his captors would have to take him into the hospital or bring a doctor to him. They would probably be reluctant to do that. But he already knew that the hostage was was more important than anything. In the off chance that something happened like him dying occurred, they wouldn't be able to threaten anybody anymore. Luckily, he had experience that would help him fake a serious illness. At the end of the last year, he was inadvertently involved in a car accident and had to undergo surgery. The scar from his surgery was still clearly visible on his lower torso. He recalled the pain and suffering from that time. The existence of that experience would make a huge impact on the realism of his performance. He was quite confident in his ability to fake an illness. His captors at first took that as a sign as he needed to use the washroom. Untying only his arms, they tried to bring him there while he was still blindfolded. But he didn't try to get up. His hands, now free, only clutched at his abdomen as he writhed in agony.
おい、どうしたんだ？腹でも痛いのか？
He still had his earplugs in, so he had to pretend he didn't hear his captors asking the question. He was about to nod, so he hurriedly had to stop himself.
どったんね。 小僧が腹を押さえてるよ。腹痛かな。
His captors looked down on his suffering for a bit. One of them proposed a course of action while another laid his doubts that Toshiki might be faking it.
どったんね、坊主。腹痛むんかい？
Your tummy hurt.
そいつ耳を塞いでるから聞こえてないぜ。
参ったんな。腹痛に効く薬なんかあらんね。薬局行って買ってくるか。
腹痛って言ったっていろんな薬があるだろう。症状がわからないうちはいい加減な薬は買えないぜ。
腹押さえてるし、便秘やん。便秘薬でも買ってくれば収まるやんね。
Honestly, the way they're saying E is olding, so they don't have any H. Like maybe E is just constipated.
間違って飲んでも死なんしな。
What is this though? For that mebe? What's it mebe? Mebe that'll calm him down. Mebe. What is mebe?
決めつけるなよ。盲腸とかかもしれないだろう。俺のおじさんがさ、昔急になったことあってよ。あれはかなりビビったぜ。
One of the captors leaned over beside the boy who was bent over in agony.
かわいそうにな。全身汗だらけじゃないかよ。腹か？痛むのか？おいおい、痛むんならあんまり抑え込んじゃかえって悪いぞ。
Realizing that his captors were concerned about his stomach, he inadvertently let his shirt right up, letting the scar from his surgery come into plain view. His vision was still obscured with the packing tape, so he couldn't see their reaction to his scar. But his captors were taken aback, and judging from their momentary silence, he had obtained the reaction he was looking for.
おい、やばいぜ。この手術跡はそんなに昔のものじゃないぜ。
その小僧、熱出てるんかいね。体温計あるん？
あるわけねえよ。でもすごい汗だぜ。おでこは結構熱いと思う。緊張状態が続くとさ、昔の傷なんかに応えたりするって聞いたことあるぜ。
じゃあどうすんよ。薬じゃ治らんちゅんてんか？
何の手術跡か知らねえけど、とにかくまずいだろう。下手すると命に関わるぜ。
まずいんて。これ本当にまずいんて。
医者に見せた方がいい。このままじゃ突然ぽっくりいっちまう可能性だってあるだろう。
Toshiki Inukai, with those few words, knew that the situation was progressing exactly as he had envisioned it, and snickering to himself on the inside, pressed his act even further. He didn't even need to see or to know that his captors were panicked and running around like chickens with their heads cut off at his troublesome turn of events, or at this troublesome turn of events.
診療所連れて行くか？
そりゃまずん。先生を連れてくる方がいいね。
入江の先生か？
Oh, the doctor.
いいのか？
Kantaku.
大丈夫か？
人質に何かあったらまずんね。しゃあない。緊急事態やん。
One of the captors hurriedly left in the car. Another of the men, completely shaken up to this point, wiped the sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. It looked like they were bringing in a doctor. As long as the doctor wasn't an accomplice, that doctor was his goal. He was someone he should seek help from. His captors were probably wary of that happening. They would be prepared for it. This would all come down to luck. Some of the sweat emerging from his brow was from the nervousness. At the moment the packing tape that was covering his eyes and ears was torn off, the burning light that he was seeing for the first time in several days hurt his eyes. After that, the gag that made it hard for him to breathe was also removed.
大丈夫かこそ。今お医者を連れてくるからな。しばらく我慢してろな。
The doctor was coming. Now, how was he going to ask for help and how was he going to get away from his captors? A plethora of thoughts began swirling through his mind.
分かってると思うが、お医者に余計なことは言うなよ。俺たちも別にお前に乱暴がしたいわけじゃないんだ。そりゃ分かってるよな。
Toshiki Inukai nodded while feigning pain in obedience. His expectations and the enemy's expectations. Whether they doubted he was faking his illness or not, they knew what his goal was and would try to stop it. His stomach contracted from the stress of this gambit, making it seem like his stomach really was starting to hurt. No, it really was. But there was no reason to panic. If he failed with his stomach to the doctor, there was nothing to lose. If there was something to lose, it was this method of faking illness to get in touch with a doctor. If he could think of other methods from here on out, it wasn't much. But at the present, this was the easiest and most dramatic way he could think of it. The more he thought about it, and the more it looked like this was his first and last gambit. Eventually, he heard the sound of a car approaching once again. The sound of the car doors being hurriedly opened and shut. The sounds of several footsteps approaching. Okay, I actually didn't read that. A young man in a white medical coat. As he acknowledged the boy, a suspicious look showed itself on his face. Okay, so if it's Irie, so I guess okay, maybe I'll just try later.
彼は
Now remember the mountain dogs, right? They said in chapter 3, right? When Keiichi was in the nurse or in the doctor, the clinic, I mean, right? And Irie was like, how many mountain dogs are here? So I guess these guys are the mountain dogs. He calls them the mountain dogs for some reason. The guy, I think the same guys in chapter 1 as well, right? So these guys were the one who, I guess, kidnapped him, not the Onigafuchi guardians.
村の子じゃありませんね。
The captors didn't respond. From the looks of it, the young doctor had realized that this was an abnormal situation. One of the captors talked threateningly.
先生には関係のないことです。
For a while, the doctor and the captors silently glared at one another. However, unable to stay on the side of the boy continuing to suffer, the doctor, as the captors had hoped, didn't press any further.
その古い手術跡というのが気になります。何の手術でしたか？
そりゃわからないです。
本当は診療所に連れ帰るべきなんですがね。
先生、そりゃさすがにちょっと。
The doctor said he wanted to bring the boy back to the clinic, but the captors simply silently shook their heads at the notion. It was a fleeting hope, but it was only natural that the captors would refuse. At the moment, his eyes met with the doctor's. Seeing that the boy's painful state was abnormal, the doctor suspected it was a serious illness.
大丈夫ですか？私は医者です。この手術跡はいつ頃のものですか？
去年の冬に事故で。
事故？そうですか。参ったな。
He couldn't let the doctor figure out that he was faking it here. He had to somehow figure out some way to keep this going and tell the doctor that he was being confined and needed help.
患部を少し触りますよ。痛むところがあったら言ってくださいね。
Okay, you gotta sell it here, Toshiki. You gotta scream when he touch it. Seeing that it was extremely painful, the doctor crossed his arms and began to ponder. He had to somehow get himself to a hospital. To Toshiki Inukai, faking this illness was the performance of a lifetime. Oh. That was it.
皆さんもご苦労さんなことです。お暑いでしょうが、せいぜい頑張ってくださいよ。不法投棄のダンプが現れたらすぐにご連絡ください。急行いたしますのでね。
ご協力感謝しますよ、大石さん。
Man, who is this?
どうぞ。
A gap wide enough for a single car was opened up in the barricade. Ooshi, showing his gratitude, or perhaps a threatening attitude, with a short beep on the horn, rolled the car forward to the checkpoint. This time, my appearance was the very embodiment of the word suspicious. A baseball cap, a mask, and sunglasses. And on top of that, it was sweltering. I was wearing a hoodie. Any respectable police officer would be allowed to not stop me for questioning. I had meant to be overcautious, knowing full well that my face was known. But it might have been already too late for that to have any use. Using that as an excuse, I doffed the unbearably hot hoodie and the windbreaker, ripped off the mask and hat, threw them in the seat behind me.
ありゃ？いいんですか？
こんな小細工したところでどうせ割れているでしょうから。
I mean, yeah, it's obvious though, like, the new person that came here is definitely him.
そりゃまあそうでしょうな。
Ooshi, probably thinking that my unexpected behavior was funny, continued to laugh. The beautiful and pristine scenery of Hinamizawa spread out before me. The village itself would have been quite beautiful if it weren't for the complicated circumstances surrounding it at the moment. I would absolutely love to take a Yuki here for a drive one day. I mean, Hinamizawa is beautiful though, it's just very, very mysterious and stuff are happening. Come to think of it, I didn't get a chance to call her last night. I played around with the idea in my head. But in reality, the village wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. I had heard everything at the prefectural headquarters. At the heart of the village, the intelligent network that the three families wielded was due to blood ties and regional relationships unbelievably well organized. Their net spread not just around Hinamizawa itself, but encapsulated the interior of the city of Shishiboni as well. When I first heard that, somewhere in the recesses of my mind, I didn't take it completely seriously. How could a local organization out in the boonies here have something so grandiose? I couldn't deny that somewhere in the back of my mind I had ridiculed the thought. But not only were they really threatening the minister, but they had demonstrated they had a complete grasp on our movements, which were supposed to be top secret. They were almost like the secret police that control a small Eastern European country, like in some spy novel. The villagers here wouldn't bat an eye at getting their hands dirty if it meant fighting the dam project. I also heard something like that at the prefectural headquarters. And now that you mention it, when I first arrived here, Uishi also said that this place was a war zone, didn't he? The residents of this village were at the same time freedom fighters. Although by definition they were no different than guerrillas or militias. Militia. They weren't protected by the Geneva Convention, but they also didn't have to adhere to those rules either. This place was more of a quarantine quagmire than any legitimate battlefield. A secret war was unfolding. I could drive along because Ooshi was with me. But if I was to leave this car for even something as trivial as looking for a vending machine, there was a chance I wouldn't return. Even though a single shot hadn't been fired, this was a battlefield. No reason why the bullets weren't flying was simply because it was too hard for a civilian to obtain a gun in Japan. So they were probably just equipped with weapons other than guns that were easier to obtain. That was why Ooshi was wearing the stab-proof vest, wasn't it?
赤坂さん、緊張してます。
The fact that I was apprehensive was, of course, picked up on by Ooshi. If he already figured it out, there was no point in trying to deny or hide it.
もちろんです。敵の本拠地にたった2人で乗り込んでいるんですよ。この人数では万一の時が不安です。
Just the two of us.
万一の時な大丈夫ですよ。
この村の人間すべてが敵ではありませんでしたか。全員が口裏を合わせればこの村で白昼堂々殺人が起こっても証拠一つ残らない、そういうところだと聞いていますよ。
This was that ironclad rule of not barging into a Yakuza office alone was about. If there wasn't a neutral party involved, that area wasn't bound by the laws of common sense. If something happened, you wouldn't be able to prove it, and there wasn't anybody who would take your side. It was pretty much the definition of poking the bear.
ひなみ沢地区へ向かうと同僚に言い残してますしね。万一の時は無線機もありますし、赤坂さんが怖がってるほどね、そう簡単には完全犯罪はできませんよ。
The perfect crime.
まあ、もちろん油断をしないに越したことはありませんがね。赤坂さん、緊張しすぎですよ。前にご一緒してた時の方がリラックスしてらしたじゃないですか。な
Laughing it off, Ooshi thumped his chest and grinned as if to say I could depend on him.
まあ、本当の本当にヤバくなったら
Iffy.
桜の大門にはこいつがありますからね。
Ooshi made a motion by sticking out his index finger. It was undoubtedly the image of a gun, okay?
役に立ちますか。
撃った後の後始末云々が怖くなければ実に心強いですよ。
An officer's gun was only for show. If you really wanted to fire it, there were quite a number of stipulations and you had to be prepared for the long probationary period afterwards. That definitely wasn't worth it, so even if an officer did unholster his gun, there wasn't one who actually wanted to pull the trigger.
赤坂さんは持ってるんですか？これ。
まあ、一応。
撃ったことは？
ありますよ。訓練でですがね。
For training, of course. Mostly.
そりゃそうでしょうな。
なら大石さんにはあるんですか？
私ですか？ねまさかあるわけないじゃないですか。
He's lying. What was this? I thought he was laughing at me because he had experience. The two of us laughed together.
銃口を向けたこともありませんがね。銃口を向けられたことなら何度かありますよ。銃口を覗かされるだけで寿命が3年は縮むな。
But yeah, it's terrifying though, for sure though. When someone puts a gun in your head, one click and you're gone. Even if he had never fired a gun before, you couldn't even begin to compare the amount of experience Ooshi had over me. At a time like this, I could only marvel again at how reliable Ooshi seemed.
そういえば日の高いうちにこっちには来たくなかったな。でも車道はここを抜ける以外にないし。赤坂さん、念のためもう一回マスクで顔を隠してください。
どうしたんです？
冷房がうるさいから聞こえないかな。切りますよ。窓を開けてみてください。
When I opened the window, a blast of hot air blew inside, and then I could hear angry yelling coming from far away. At that moment, the forest gave way on either side of us and our view expanded suddenly. And there could be seen the Hinamizawa Dam construction grounds. the very front line of or for Hinamizawa village. The crackling blare of someone's voice sounded over an enormous loudspeaker. The roar of angry voices continued to rumble. The incredible volume had become a veritable sound cannon spewing out its ammunition. The prefabricated site office was surrounded by two sets of high fences laced with barbed wire. Lined up in front of those fences were a riot police and their vehicles. And surrounding it all were the villagers. They howled at their protest against the dam as a single entity.
今日は少ないですね。ついてます。
少ないんですか？
ええ、多い時だと道路までいっぱいになりますよ。うちうち車も通れません。
At first, due to their overwhelming intensity, it looked to me like there was more people than there actually was, but upon closer inspection, there were at most 50 to 70 of them. But 6 or 7 propaganda trucks lined up that looked like they belonged to bandit thugs were a strange enough sight. The villagers were also wearing helmets and bandanas, as well as covering their faces with masks, adding to the oddity of it all. The propaganda trucks, after braying their chorus, had their volume turned up even higher and began to flood the area with sutras. Sutras? To say that the noise was downright violent wouldn't be an understatement. From this distance, it was still this loud, the glass in the office was probably rattling from the noise.
あれをガンガンやられるとたまんないんですよね。昨日の連中、全員耳栓してて、それでも耳がおかしくなるそうです。気の毒な話です。
騒音規制でなんとかできないんですか？
うちの県には騒音規制に関する規定ね、ないんですよ。それにほら、お経でしょ。宗教活動規制できないし、連中も頭いいんです。
Is what I think Ooshi said. Wait, what is a sutra, by the way? Actually, no matter how tightly the window was shut, the booming sound of the sutra still filled the car. I couldn't even hear what Ooshi, who was sitting right next to me, was saying. As the car approached the line of propaganda trucks, the blare became difficult to bear. It wasn't enough to just plug my ears with fingers, I had to hold my head to keep my skull from splitting apart. If I had seen this terrifying energy sooner, I would have probably understood that Hinamizawa village was much quicker. No, I knew they wouldn't blink an eye at sacrificing themselves in order to protect their own town or their hometown. So goddamn noisy. Shut up! Shut up! My head throbbed and it felt like it was going to split apart. My eardrums crackled and top of it all, I felt like I was going to throw up. With the road crowded with a throng of squatters, the propaganda trucks and the riot police vehicles, it was in no way easy to get by. Even if you tried to shoo the squatters with a car horn, they were also wearing earplugs oblivious to noise from the outside world and wouldn't easily move the car. Yeah, it wasn't easy to move. The car could only inch forward a snail's pace. Even then, the car eventually got through, starting to leave the tumultuous noises behind.
ほら、昨日一緒に麻雀やったメンツにお年寄りさんいたでしょ。覚えてます？
Yes, I remember the old guy. I remember that there was an older person who didn't exactly like to mince words. That guy that Ooshi called old man.
いらっしゃいましたね。
Yeah, the foreman.
第一航空の現場監督さんなんですよ。あそこのプレハブの中でイライラしながら仕事をなさってるんでしょうね。お気の毒なことです。
あれが毎日ではたまったものではないでしょう。耐えかねて辞めちゃう人が後を絶ちません。
まあその度にお給金がアップしてるんで何とも言えませんが
Even having to deal with all that noise and hostility, they still made a wage that Ooshi found enviable.
ちっくしょうこいつら聞こえてるのか聞こえてないのか
A group of squatters were in the way of the car. Ooshi, sufficiently annoyed, laid into the horn, but there was no indication that they were moving anytime soon. Into this din, could they not even hear a car horn? I mean, everything is so loud and probably couldn't hear this, or did they hear it and they were being malicious? If there were any riot police nearby, they would have made people move, but it just so happened there weren't any around here.
もうちょいと待っててください
Why, you gonna go outside and gonna fire shots? Ooshi opened up the door. The hot air and even more heated roar of the crowd spilled into the car. Ooshi said something as he grinned widely, but I couldn't hear what it was. He was getting them to move. Something like that? Ooshi stepped out of the car and closed the door. The din faded slightly. I stared blankly at as Ooshi headed towards the group and started some sort of conversation. Maybe we'd find the minister's grandson at Takatsudo. At the very least, I wanted to find him there. Find him and then slip the cursed bonds of this incomprehensible village. I could only pray. At the moment, a shadow was suddenly cast over me. Somebody was standing right outside the passenger side window, blocking the sunlight. I spun around, looked up, and realized who the backlit figure was. Rika-chan. It was a girl. It was Rika Furude. The girl stared down at me with a bored look in her eyes. I didn't have any justification for it, but I felt like I had been found by somebody I shouldn't be found by. To fill the silence, I raised my hands as I mouthed a meek greeting. Of course, there was no way she'd heard my small voice in this clamor. But even then, she's so scary though like this. She should have seen me wave my hand in greeting. In spite of that, she simply stared down at me with a cold look on her face. At the moment, the noise and heat spread throughout the car once again. Ooshi had returned to the driver's seat. Taking a look, the group that were blocking the road had started to move aside while glaring our way.
お待たせしました行きましょうか
Ooshi registered the figure of the girl behind me. One of the villagers came over and picked her up. In a manner of it's dangerous, so get away. It was then she whispered one or two words, however I couldn't hear any of it.
さて行きましょうかね飛ばしますよもちろん法定速度遵守で
As if to shake off the still audible angry voices, Ooshi floored the gas. Along with the roar and the din and the shouting, the villagers and the girl quickly disappeared behind us.
この先を抜けると高津戸地区です銃撃戦の覚悟は大丈夫ですか安全装置外すの土壇場でとちらないでくださいよ
Ooshi laughed mockingly again. I was more concerned with what that girl had said, however, as I was vaguely bothered by it. What was she saying or trying to say with that apathetic and candid expression?
今から緊張したって仕方ないですよむしろ収穫がなくて勇み足って可能性だって十分にあるんですから
But there was no longer a way to confirm what the girl had tried to tell me. It might have been that the girl who warned me to go back to Tokyo again, or else was saying to me who was here now, ignoring the warning.
警告したのにバカなやつ
What a fool. I had the feeling she said something like that. Higurashi, when they cry. I guess next time. Yeah, I guess we're gonna take a break here, but next time we're probably gonna be saving Toshiki, right? For sure. Okay, let's take a break here. But yeah, it was nice that we have some scenes with Toshiki, even we don't know his face there. Irie showed up as well, and we're heading to Takatsudo. So yeah, I guess we're gonna just end it here, and we're gonna continue this and do more of Higurashi When They Cry, Chapter 4, Himatsubushi, in the next one. For sure, a lot of action in the next episode, right? So I'll just see you then, guys. Bye bye.